Live. This is One for the Record. I'm Diana, and today is March 30th, 2013. And here are your news updates for today. I'm still going to have to figure out how to adjust this camera. Let's see here. Alright, moving on. I will be attaching Thursday's Nutrimedical report, and then possibly tomorrow, Friday's Nutrimedical report. So hang in there. You should be watching that right after this report for Thursdays. It's very interesting. Alrighty then. Let's go to the Extinction Protocol 2012 and beyond. British tour operator in North Korea warns to stay away. Outbreak of war hours away. Also, California's Orange County. Parents warn about potentially deadly disease. So heads up in Orange County. Maybe we should look at that one. Let's see if I can find that and see what they're talking about. It's a lot about the landslide on here. I can't get to it for some reason. This is not my computer, so we're having a little difficulty in maneuvering. I'm getting there with it, though. Alrighty then. North Korea puts rockets on standby to mercilessly strike the U.S. Alrighty then. Madagascar suffers its worst plague of locusts in more than a half a century. Alright, moving on. Let's get rid of that one. Alright, the Watchers watching the world. Ocean cleanup array developed by 19-year-old could save millions each year and impact human health. Dangerous gas emissions at DEAGLE volcano in central Java, Indonesia. Alrighty then, that's enough of the Watchers. Let's go into Fukushima, Japan. Here we go. ENE News, the Energy News. NHK. Many people have reported medical problems since the Fukushima nuclear disaster began. Also, yesterday, worker rat at Fukushima Daiichi measured 15 microsieverts per hour. It's a moving radioactive material. Okay, let's go into U.S. Canada for a moment. See, excuse me. CBS, Los Angeles. Dead sea lions everywhere. Rescuer. I've never seen anything like this. We've never would have imagined the numbers. Expert. No oceanographic explanation for what we're seeing. Also today. Radio. Energy pendants very popular on internet. Radioactive dose of 200 millisieverts a year detected. Much higher than nuclear worker limit. To be worn around neck. Yesterday, on the Daily Show gets nuclear exclusive, a phenomenal story about processing uranium in U.S. 12-minute extended video. Alrighty then. So it's the first day down of the weekend. I'll see you again tomorrow on the flip side on Sunday. It's the Resurrection Day. Happy Easter. And everyone take care. Be safe. If you have to work tonight, please wear your uniform home. Alright. Take care. And always be prepared.
What have you learned, and what are you telling KEPCO? What have you learned recently about radiation releases? Because my radiation detector is getting what I call brief and very sharp rises in radiation. They'll go from 45, which is about double normal, to 75, and then 20 minutes later it's back to normal. So there's something going on where there's radiation being re-released from Japan. It's coming in waves. We now know that there's a giant glob of radiation that was presented last week in New York City by Arnie Gunderson and Ruth, what's her name, Caldecott. All these other doctors are dealing with radiation hazards in New York City. They're dealing with the disaster of Fukushima. And we want to get that map and post it up because apparently there's a cohesive glob of radiation that moves south of the Kuroshi Current that's heading toward Alaska and the North America, including British Columbia, Washington State, Oregon, and California, and the Baja. This circulates across the Pacific and, by the way, connects to every single major oceanic current on the planet. So within a matter of a couple of years, these massive radiation dumps, which occurred 2 years ago, are going to be in every ocean on Earth, including the Southern Hemisphere. People need to grasp this is not just a Fukushima, too bad you Americans, you're getting blasted. This is everybody on the planet, especially the Northern Hemisphere. So what did you learn?
Well, let's discuss the transport mechanism and why we're seeing waves of radiation. And I've got to go. I'm going to reiterate that I'm not the expert on radiation, although my bailiwick is nuclear power plants themselves and the physical construct of them and the operation there to prevent any kind of a release like we're seeing. But what we discussed this too was that we are seeing waves because the ocean currents and the air currents are not homogeneous. They are natural. It's a natural flow, an ebb and flow. What we're seeing, so it makes sense to me that it's not over and that we are seeing continuous. Call it action, continuous action of the waves of radiation that was released and what is still being released. Or radioactive material that's still being released. So it doesn't surprise me after seeing Caldecott's and Gunderson's report. Let me go on to how to stop this, how to prevent it. Well, we should have nipped it in the bud way before then. We should have stopped it before it even started, because that would be the most effective approach. And to segue into what the Koreans, I know I'm talking about what they're doing, but to their credit, they are very serious about taking action now to prevent such an outcome from occurring in the future by setting up a command and control structure where people from the top down understand everything that needs to be done. This is not an easy task for anybody, but they are driven to ensure that only the most knowledgeable folks at the very top are going to take action when it's necessary and not bicker between.
You want to have factions like bickering of whether or not to release the hydrogen like they did because they knew it was a full release system for hydrogen building up in the torus. Like the two groups that fought in Japan at TEPCO, which, by the way, they knew that America was doing these hydrogen upgrades to the Mark I type reactors. We also know that here's the big problems I see with this whole issue. They keep dancing around it. It's like the Faustian kind of bargain with the devil. You've got to change and upgrade these nuclear technologies to more current technology. You can't keep rebuilding old factories. Number two, you got to get the radioactive waste off site. Number three, you got to protect your backup power, whether or not it's making sure you're above the water line or tsunami zone line. Because a lot of time they would have made estimates, this is a century or a millennial tsunami. They literally lied to themselves and used a sharp pencil trying to tell them that they could never have a tsunami that big that would overcome their diesel generators. When they damn well should have known, you don't build a nuclear reactor in a fault zone, and you certainly don't underestimate a possible tsunami that could strike every century. And the third thing that I think has to be realized is that the first reactor in TEPCO was destroyed not by the tsunami, but by the earthquake. There were also reactors on the other side of the island in Oe and elsewhere in Honshu that were also damaged seriously. There was hundreds of tons of water released from a storage depot, one of the reactors on the other side of the island, that was damaged. And people always want to focus on Fukushima. But the problem is there's a whole line of reactors running all the way up to Mount Fuji, and Mount Fuji's magma chamber is refilling, which means every 2 or 3 centuries, roughly every 3 centuries, Mount Fuji blows. And when it blows, it has a blast zone that kills everything within about 150 to 200 miles, and it causes a lot of damage beyond that. The fact is, when that happens, a super earthquake, a super tsunami is very possible because there's upthrust zones all over the area. And we're not just talking about cyclonic currents that carry it eastward toward America. They carry it over China and the South China Sea and toward Korea as well. So people need to realize that there's also currents that carry in the upper atmosphere all the way from TEPCO in Japan across the equator to Australia. And they discovered over a year ago that were major spikes in radiation that occurred months afterward in the west coast of Australia, east coast of Australia. So the idea, there's a lot of premises being made here that they can just increase the command and control structure, or they can harden the power grid backups, and they can do all kinds of what I call window dressing. But they have to kind of take the bull by the horns and say, we need to get rid of old technology. We need to not build reactors in danger zones. We need to upgrade reactors that are in danger zones to make them basically natural gas generators that if it blows, you're not going to have a nuclear waste depot that becomes basically a nuclear bomb. But we don't have that kind of action. In fact, the Japanese were even petitioning one of the companies in western United States in the Bakken to supply, one company to supply all their gas is to convert all their nuclear reactors to natural gas. And the Obama administration, under its green agenda, actually blocked it. So when people hear these things, they think it's a Comedy Central joke that we actually made this up. We didn't. But when I hear this from KEPCO, I'm thinking they sound very Korean, but are they going to bite the whole bullet? Are they going to actually do what's necessary so if a major superquake or tsunami or major extreme weather like the day after tomorrow happens, will they have nuclear integrity? And I seriously doubt it. I think they're going to be much more forthright than the Japanese, but look at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission here. They get rid of the old one because he's raising too many questions, and the new one is doing nothing. I don't see anything concrete happening that tells me that if we have a New Madrid superquake or up at the Diablo Canyon facility or even here in San Onofre, they're still dancing around whether they're going to let that reactor get turned on. And I'm going to tell you, I'm personally, well, many other people here in Southern California, we're going to sue their ass off for doing it. The state government, the federal government, and any parties, including the Japanese company that put these in 2 years ago, $600 million apiece, that made these junk reactors and changed engineering designs and tried to not go through a relicensure process. So your comments, Chris?
Well, we have seen in the last week or so an important piece of electrical equipment in Fukushima fail because it was exposed to weather. A report came out today, as a matter of fact, as to what the root cause was. There was animal intrusion, and this type of
the killer rat, the rat from hell that decided to kill itself by biting into a power panel on the back of a truck in TEPCO.
That power panel should not have been on the back of a truck. Number one, it should have been, and it was under a tarpaulin. It should have been in a more sturdy structure. It
should have been in a hardened structure that could not be bitten by animals. Right. It should have been protected from radiation degradation of the wiring and the plastic, because gamma rays and neutrons will destroy wiring and insulation as well. Amazing. Stupid. Two nations have geotectonic weapons. Us and the Russians. Welcome back, and so Chris, what you're basically saying is KEPCO is trying to look tough and trying to be very Korean, but really they're doing window dressing. TEPCO is having major releases. They recently just got, had a nuclear bullet whiz past their ears. The facility continues to degenerate and subside. We continue to have hydrovolcanic releases of radiation. And we have a massive glob of radiation in a giant, super high concentration that's actually moving in below the normal benthic layer across the Pacific Ocean, and it's heading here. We also have radioactive sea lions, radioactive tuna. Most people don't realize that most of the sushi bars here in Southern California, there's nearly 1,000 of them just from Los Angeles south to San Diego, just in Southern Cal. Their tuna doesn't come from the Atlantic Ocean or elsewhere. It doesn't come from, and by the way, have tuna farms in the Aegean Sea. They have Aegean tuna, believe it or not. And from all the fancy tuna, they grow them in the Aegean Sea, which are clean. But no, most of the tuna is going to be coming from what I call radioactive waters, because their playground is called Fukushima Daiichi. They're literally
Dr.
off
Bill,
Sendai,
haven't
Japan.
you had on the West Coast, is it 1,000 or is it 10,000? I just read this yesterday. Sea lions wash up dead, and most
and
were
they're
born last
washing
summer.
up dead because if you're a sea, what's the best flavored fish that you can get raw in the Pacific Ocean? It starts with a T and it ends with an A. It's called tuna. Tuna's at the top of the food chain. Tuna literally breed in the waters off of southern of Japan, and they head over here to the Baja California. If you go to Ensenadas, a couple of years ago you'd see these big fat giant sea lions. Now you see them shriveled up, you see them dead, you see them like, man, they don't look good. They haven't been to the Sandal Sea Lion Resort. These sea lions are eating something that's killing them.
Yeah.
That's what's going on.
And it's coming here more and more.
Yeah, exactly. Now,
I literally am at the point where I believe that one should not eat seafood from the Gulf of Mexico, and that includes a lot of shrimp that's sold in America,
right,
and really nothing from the northern Pacific.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I'll tell you why. Because you don't know specifically where it goes. What I think you should do is get an Inspector EXP with a little arm and become a pariah and walk into your seafood shop or your restaurant or your grocery store and see if it goes click, click, click. And then what you should say loudly is if it does go click, 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 said back away from the seafood. So, Chris, any closing comments? What words of advice would you have to, I call government officials because they listen to the program, because they ask three things: who's on DEAGLE's program, what questions are they asking, and how do they know it? What would you say to them
the guys are
as advice?
To be in charge, I guess. Your folks who are in the Navy and perhaps other branches, I'm going to tell them to get qualified, and that means learn the systems that are crucial to maintaining safety. And in the case of Fukushima, that was an atrocity that they let that switchgear unit sitting out in the back of a truck under a tarp be subject. Let me put it this way. If you were to take a garden hose and spray down the breaker box for your house, would you expect everything to run after that? Probably not.
Probably not.
Let's say you took a couple of buckets of salt water and threw it against your breaker box. Would you expect anything to run later on?
I'd
you
rather
probably need
throw
electricity to
it
change.
that way than use a hose, because you might get fried if you use a hose.
Right. Here's the thing, too. You also would realize you're going to need an electrician to replace the breaker box because it's going to be dead and useless and will never work again.
Well, certainly they had to run a lot of extra power cable through areas that were relatively inaccessible or very difficult to access. And so what you've done was you've exposed more workers to more dangers that they needed to be because you didn't maintain something that was there. And then the regulators were supposed to be the watchdogs for the whole thing. They didn't even know that thing was out there rusting away for a couple of years. And so that actually limits the faith that one could put in a regulatory body. And in my mind, they're just as culpable as the operator, which would be TEPCO in that case. And so
right.
Really, who's really guarding the hen house? Or does anybody? Just because somebody's got a badge on that says I'm in charge, do they really know what in heck they're doing?
No, my general impression, having worked with the FEMA and the CDC, is that these people take stupidity to an Olympic level. And the problem is, if you're going to take those levels of responsibility for the lives and the future of America and the world, you got to take it more seriously. We don't see any action on the International Atomic Energy Association. We don't see the United Nations raising this issue. We don't see our government being in a panic over the fact we've had 2 years of constantly being salted with radioisotopes. For example, they'll wear the pink badge, but the cesium-137 is going to actually cause breast cancer. We know that. The thyroid has now increased by 400 to 800% the number of abnormal thyroid nodules and thyroid cancer in Americans already since Fukushima.
I wouldn't believe you about this, but I've sat down with 3 American generals on the issue of advanced biological warfare and what we can do to protect ourselves, and I came away just shaking my head like they really, really don't get it.
Well, I told them exactly what to do. And this is 2001, 6 months before 9/11. In 1997, which is a few years ago now. That was 1997. You know how many years ago that is now? That's a long time. Okay? 16 years ago. Now, Here's what's going to happen. I expect an airborne plague to be released this year. I expect a bank meltdown to occur between now and next year. I expect the Mideast to blow up because it's already regional war. Don't say it's going to happen in the future. I expect Fukushima Daiichi, these earthquakes that are happening all over the place, to cause further major radiation releases of buildings and structures, not just at Fukushima.
The radioactivity was filtered out by water. We'll discuss why cesium release calculations are important and why TEPCO's incorrect assumptions have led to incorrect personal dose calculations. Today, we're joined by Fairewinds Chief Nuclear Engineer, Arnie Gunderson, for a technical discussion on the Fukushima cesium releases. Arnie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kevin. It's good to be back after a bout with the flu.
Well, about 2 weeks ago, just before you had the flu, you were in New York City for a presentation being put on by Dr. Helen Caldicott. It was the second anniversary of the Fukushima Daiichi disaster. The event was the medical and ecological consequences of the Fukushima nuclear accident. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It was at a med school in New York City, and it was also simulcast. So we had, an auditorium full of people, 400, 500 people in the auditorium. But more importantly, we had 4,000 people online watching this thing as it was being live streamed. The experts that the Caldicott Foundation was able to get together were really impressive. They had the former Prime Minister of Japan started the conference off. That's Nato Kan. He was in charge of Japan during the accident. And he's the guy who forced Tokyo Electric to stay on site. I spoke, Dave Lockbaum spoke from Union of Concerned Scientists. And then Akio Matsumura, the former Japanese ambassador. But then a group of scientists spoke extensively. Tim Mousseau from University of South Carolina, who specializes in the effect of radiation on animals. Dr. Steve Wing from NC State spoke about the problems in doing dose assessments the way the Japanese are trying to do them. On and on and on. There was a list of heavy hitters that are recorded, and all of them are available online.
So Arnie, today on the Fairewinds website, we're publishing your presentation in video format. Any of our viewers can go on the website, download the video, and actually watch the PowerPoint presentation next to it. Can you talk a little bit about your presentation?
Yeah, if you were to watch what's on the Caldicott Foundation website, all they have is the slides and my voice somewhere in the background. What you were able to do is really cool. You've got the camera that was trained on me, so I'm on half of the video presentation, and the other half is the slides, and we've been able to synchronize them so that they work. So it makes a little more sense if you haven't gone through them already. It's a really important presentation, and they held me to half an hour, which was tough, but there's a lot of new information about the consequences of this accident to the Japanese that I don't believe have been out there in, certainly not mainstream media. I don't believe any media is aware of the information that I was trying to put out there.
Well, given all the time in the world, how long would your presentation really be?
Oh, I could have easily taken another 20 minutes.
So Arnie, obviously I've watched the presentation, and I know that there's one PowerPoint slide that you really want to focus on. Slide 67. What is on slide 67?
Well, that's, I think, the most important new information to come out of the entire conference. And it revolves around the issue of how much cesium was released from the Fukushima Daiichi accident. The nuclear industry wants everybody to believe that all of the water inside the containment absorbed all that cesium. But slide 67 clearly shows that couldn't have happened. It's a really blurry shot, and it's an infrared photograph looking down on Fukushima Unit 3. And there's a big spot on the corner that shows the fuel pool. That's not where the action is. The action's a little spot more toward the center of the photograph. And that spot is at 128 degrees centigrade. That's above the boiling point of water. So I got to get into a little bit about boiling water here to make this really understandable. Well, Tokyo Electric and the present Japanese government and the entire nuclear community are trying to say that only 1% of all the cesium that could have gotten out did get out. And the secret is in the assumptions that they're using right there. Cesium is the nastiest of the elements that was released. Not the only one, but the nastiest. And it's, of course, what I detected on the ground in Tokyo and what people have found all over the world now. It's the most pervasive element. And I think perhaps as much as 10 to 20% of the cesium was released. And I've got the proof.
So you have a disagreement with TEPCO about just how much cesium was released?
Yes, absolutely. And it ties right back into public health. And what was the exposure to the people in Japan, and how many people are going to die?
What argument is TEPCO using to justify their cesium release figures?
Well, there's a lot of old scientific evidence that shows that if you take hot cesium gases and you bubble them through steam, only 1% of the cesium will get out. It's essentially scrubbed. We call that a DF, a decontamination factor of 100. So Tokyo Electric is hiding behind all this old science that talks about, well, when you release radioactive cesium into water, the water traps it. And therefore, the people in the surroundings were safe, and it really didn't matter that the containment was leaking.
So Tokyo Electric is arguing that the containment was submerged in water when the accident happened.
Yes, Tokyo Electric believes that there is always water inside the containment. But slide 67 shows that that can't happen. And it's not a matter of opinion, it's raw science here.
Why can't it happen?
Well, if you take a frying pan and heat it up, and watch the little bubbles on the bottom of the pan, that's called nucleate boiling. And then when the bubbles get bigger, that's called departure from nucleate boiling. And then when the whole pan starts just violently bubbling, that's called bulk boiling. But all of them occur when the water's 212 at boiling. And water can't get over 212 on this planet unless you have extraordinary pressures on it. So if you have a boiling hot a frying pan that's red hot and you pour water on it, the water is only going to get to 212 before it flashes to steam. And that's where slide 67 comes in. 212 is the same as 100 centigrade. Now, slide 67 shows this thermal flare right where the containment should be. And it's releasing gases at 128 degrees centigrade. That means that can't be steam squirting out that hole, because if it was steam, it would be at 100 degrees centigrade. The extra heat means that it's hot, radioactive cesium gas squirting out directly from the containment 9 days after the accident.
So you've been saying the water boils at 212, but that is 100 degrees centigrade, just to be clear.
Yes, correct.
So water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. Water can't exist as steam at anything above that. And you're saying that the TEPCO data shows that the temperature of the gases escaping the containment were in fact above that.
Right. And now what that means is that there could be no liquid water inside the containment. When there's no liquid water inside the containment, there's no capture of the cesium. So whatever cesium was inside that containment was leaking out of the containment. There's another slide in the presentation that says that TEPCO estimates the containment leak rate was 300% a day. So whatever radioactive gases were inside that containment, every 8 hours were being released out that thermal flare. Well, that changes the game dramatically. Instead of 1% of the cesium, it's likely that 20 or 30% of the cesium were released. And at that point, that's very similar to what we saw at Chernobyl. So I've been saying that the Fukushima Daiichi accident is very comparable to the Chernobyl accident. In fact, we know for sure the noble gases were 3 times higher at Fukushima than they were at Chernobyl. That's covered extensively in my talk, and I don't have to go there today. But the Japanese didn't measure that, and it blew away. So they're not worried about that exposure to their people. They're looking at the cesium now. They're trying to claim that only 1% of the cesium got out because that's what the old tests showed. Well, the old tests showed don't match this slide 67, the infrared picture. And the infrared picture shows hot radioactive gases being released directly out into the atmosphere 9 days after the accident. It's a really important discovery, and I hope that the people doing dose assessments will understand that they're not dealing with a reactor containment that had water in it. They're dealing with a reactor containment that had hot gas in it.
So, Arnie, this is all about steam bubbles. And you're an expert, I understand, in steam bubbles.
Well, when you're a nuclear engineer, you have to take a course in steam bubbles. I took a 3-credit course watching steam bubble. The nucleate boiling, departure from nucleate boiling, and bulk boiling are driven into my thick skull. The other thing I could bore you to death about is cooling tower plumes. That was my master's thesis.
So you know when and where steam can and can't exist, basically.
That's right. And so we are not talking about an area that can be in scientific dispute. This is raw physics. This is the stuff they teach kids in freshman and sophomore physics in college. And water doesn't exist over 100 degrees centigrade, 212 Fahrenheit. And yet that picture that we're bringing up on slide 67 clearly shows something hot is leaking out of that containment. This is hot radioactive cesium gas.
But TEPCO's making the argument that the water that was in and around the reactor filtered out the cesium.
That's right. And they're arguing, too, that everything you see coming off the top of that nuclear reactor was steam. It can't be steam, and it had to be cesium.
So we're talking about the percentage, the amount of cesium that escaped the reactor. Of course, you have a different opinion than TEPCO, but in the end, if you're right, what does that mean to the people? What kind of difference in dose can the people of Japan expect?
Yeah, I can understand where the average Japanese doesn't care what the decontamination factor was, but he very much cares what the exposure was to the son or daughter. So what this means is that the cesium dose that the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and the Japanese government is calculating is way low. We had a call a couple of weeks ago from a scientist who talked about his work with Japanese scientists, and they were deliberately under-calculating the amount of radiation that they were measuring tenfold. His instrument was reading 10 times higher than the guy standing right next to him. And when he caught him at it, they said they had a loose wire. Well, they didn't have a loose wire. It's systemic within the Japanese nuclear establishment right now that they're underestimating dose. And when you underestimate what you measure, you need the theoretical foundation to support that. And the Japanese, in order to do that, needed to say, well, all the cesium's inside that nuclear reactor, only 1% leaked out. In fact, much more leaked out. And I think my leak rate and the amount of cesium that is in that leak rate match up a lot better with the exposures that the people in Japan really got. The IAEA says 100 people are going to die from this. Well, I think it's going to be 1,000 times higher than that. And the difference is in the assumptions. And I think my assumptions are supported a lot more by the data from the field, and the IAEA is hiding behind some old studies.
Arnie, my favorite slide is slide number 75 on the presentation, a picture of Tokyo. Tell me about that. Why is that in there?
Yeah, it's a glorious picture of Tokyo at night. And over to the right, by the way, is the Tokyo Electric Tower, but we won't go there. It's a beautiful photograph, first off. But secondly, it shows the vibrancy of Tokyo City. Tokyo City, including the greater metropolitan area, is 35 million people. And here's NATO Khan at the beginning of the conference saying that the existence of Japan as a sovereign nation was jeopardized. Well, my point in this entire presentation is at some point, the risks of a technology become untenable. And I think that's what the Daiichi accident showed us. If the next time we risk another city the size of Tokyo, sooner or later you're going to roll snake eyes here. And if we just missed it with Fukushima Daiichi, there'll be another one coming unless we change horses.
Arnie Gunderson, thanks for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kevin.
Well, that does it for this week's show. You can catch us back here next Wednesday and every Wednesday for more technical discussion on what's happening in the world of nuclear news. Also, don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. For Fairewinds Energy Education, I'm Kevin Hurley. Thanks for listening.